You're holding that baby like a rag doll, Mrs. Elsher. If you won't fix it, I will. That's what Isolde Moran, president of the Monarch Ridge Reserve HOA board, said before raising her hand and slapping my wife across the arm. Not a brush, not a warning, a sharp, open palm strike that jolted my daughter's tiny body and left Morel frozen mid-rock on the birch chair. Avon screamed, Morel gasped, and Isolde? She stood there smug, like she'd just corrected a crooked flower pot. Consider this a compliance intervention, she said, adjusting her HOA badge. That posture could permanently affect spinal development. I was already standing by the time her words landed. The porch floor creaked beneath me as I stepped forward, slow, measured, so I didn't act on impulse. You just assaulted the mother of a medically fragile newborn, I said, my voice flat. And for your sake, I hope you like being served through certified mail. Her smirk faltered for half a beat. She hadn't expected the porch cam mounted under the eaves. She definitely hadn't seen the red indicator light. Subscribe now, because the moment I turn this footage in, a woman who thought HOA rules gave her permission to slap a nursing mother is going to meet the law, and she's not ready for who's behind it. I'm Corwin Elsher, licensed environmental risk compliance officer for 3 Western states. When a pipeline, dam, or corporate structure gets reviewed for structural failure or liability exposure, I'm the guy they bring in to find what everyone else missed. I've shut down multi-million-dollar developments because someone poured concrete 2 inches off spec. And right now, the violation I just witnessed is clearer than most sinkholes I've flagged. Isolde's handprint still glowed faint pink on Morel's arm. My daughter was cradled against her chest, whimpering in choppy breaths. That chair, the one Isolde had just reached over to strike from, wasn't decorative. It was the birch rocking chair my grandfather made by hand the winter my mother died. It's where Morel feeds Avon each morning under natural light, following a NICU-issued protocol to regulate our daughter's underdeveloped nervous system. The swing, the silence, the softness of that routine. That was Avon's stability. And now, my wife was trembling, mid-feed, with our child sobbing against her skin, because a woman with a clipboard decided community standards meant putting hands on her. She failed to correct her positioning, Isolde continued, speaking to no one and everyone. The HOA will be filing an official report on maternal endangerment. I turned the porch cam feed toward her, paused right at the frame where her hand connects. This footage is time-stamped and auto-synced to a compliance archive, I said, and Section 4.8 of your own bylaws doesn't cover physical contact under any condition, not even pretend enforcement. Isolde blinked. You'll be hearing from the board, she said tightly. Good, I said. So will the North Vale County Prosecutor's Office. She didn't recognize the name. Not yet. She wouldn't know that Meriton Elsher, the man who handles felony battery and impersonation of authority charges for this district, is my father. She wouldn't know that I hadn't spoken to him in months, not since we left city life to find somewhere quiet to raise our daughter. But silence ends the second you strike my family. Across the street, I saw 2 neighbors stop mid-walk. One of them, a retired teacher named Edith, just stared, mouth open. She didn't need to say anything. She'd seen enough. And so had I. The air was still. The birch chair creaked behind us like it had something to say. I reached out and gently took Morel's hand. Her palm was damp. She didn't look at me, not yet. Her eyes were on Avon. I'm so sorry, I whispered to both of them. Isolde turned sharply and walked off without another word, heels clicking against the stone path like a gavel. This isn't just a woman enforcing a rule. It's someone weaponizing fake authority. It's someone who thought no one would push back. But today she chose the wrong porch. The violation notice showed up before noon, folded twice, slid halfway under our front doormat, sealed with the Monarch Ridge Reserve HOA gold foil sticker. Morel didn't touch it. She stood inside the glass door, arms wrapped around Avon, rocking side to side like she was trying to undo the morning with motion. The baby had finally stopped crying. Her breaths were shallow and scattered, the kind that didn't come easy after a scream that deep. I opened the envelope with 2 fingers. The paper was thick, like it had been printed at a courthouse. Notice of Community Safety Intervention, it read in bold type. Below that, resident observed engaging in improper infant support posture resulting in public distress. HOA president acted within authorized oversight under Section 14.1. 4 violation points. One more, and we'd be fined. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because the form already had the date and time printed in the header. They hadn't even waited for a meeting. Isolde had printed it before the slap. Morel lowered herself onto the edge of the couch. Her shirt was still damp on one side. Avon stirred lightly against her chest. She's going to take this further, isn't she? She thinks she already won, I said, folding the paper in half again. But that wasn't a warning. That was a confession. I pulled my laptop from the side table drawer and loaded the doorcam archive. The footage was there, high definition, 30 seconds before the contact, 30 seconds after. Clear as glass. I saved a backup on a private external server and uploaded a duplicate to a secure cloud folder I use when investigating infrastructure accidents. The email notification pinged, footage uploaded, incident strike red. I'd never used that file tag outside of construction sites. Across the street, Edith, the neighbor who'd witnessed the slap, was bent at her mailbox. She glanced toward our house more than once. I gave her a small nod through the blinds. She didn't wave back. Around 3, I heard the clubhouse printer firing up. That was the thing about Monarch Ridge. You couldn't hear traffic, but you could hear that old printer from 4 houses down. When it started churning, it meant flyers were coming. Half an hour later, Morel came back from the nursery looking pale. "There's a bulletin on the community board," she said. "It's about me." I didn't ask how she found out. The clubhouse stood at the heart of the neighborhood's walking path loop. You couldn't go for a stroll without seeing the bulletin board. I took Avon and let Morel rest. Then I walked straight there. The new flyer was pinned top center in clear plastic. It was titled, "Parental Diligence Matters." Underneath was a paragraph that began, "In response to recent concerns regarding infant safety and improper public conduct." There were no names, just a sanitized version of the story framed around risk mitigation and non-compliant postnatal care. The words were soft. The message was poison. 2 other residents were already reading it when I arrived. One of them, a man in his 60s with a therapy dog, turned away when he saw me. The other, a younger mother I hadn't met, gave me a tight smile. The kind that meant, "I'm sorry, but I won't get involved." Isolde was winning with shadows. Quiet insinuation, implied danger, safety as a shield. She wasn't just targeting Morel, she was conditioning the neighborhood to agree, and it was working. By evening, someone left a second copy of the notice on our porch. This time, it was printed on bright red paper with the words, "Community Observation Repeat Flag" in the footer. Morel stayed in the nursery most of the night. I heard the white noise machine and the soft shuffle of her feet across the carpet. Avon cried only once. Morel didn't call for me. That silence hurt worse than the scream. The next morning, 2 more homes had the flyer pinned to their doors. Not the warning, just the original bulletin. Which meant the HOA was spreading it deliberately. They weren't just building a case, they were building a narrative. And the problem with narratives, especially ones built on fear, is that they spread faster than truth. The board meeting was scheduled for 6:30 p.m., but when I arrived 5 minutes early, the conference room was already half full. Residents filled the folding chairs arranged in tidy rows across the community center's pinewood flooring. The lighting buzzed overhead, cold and flickering in the corners. The HOA board members sat behind a long table at the front, arranged like a tribunal. Isolde Morin sat in the center. Her nameplate gleamed under the fluorescence. She wore the same gray blazer from the day she struck Morel, her hair pinned in a severe twist, her lips set in a calm, knowing line. To her right sat Tom Vennick, the board treasurer. His posture was stiff, hands folded tightly over a manila folder, knuckles pale. His eyes didn't lift as I entered the room. I took a seat in the back row. "Meeting will now come to order," Isolde announced, tapping her pen against a porcelain cup. Our first item this evening, review of recent enforcement actions under Section 14.1 regarding public safety violations. Not a word about what had happened. Not the slap. Not the screaming child. Just a sterile phrase wrapped in policy. She gestured to the projector. A slide appeared showing a sanitized version of the porch cam footage. The image was grainy and frozen just before contact. The angle obscured her strike. The audio was conveniently muted. "Due to circulating misinformation," she said, We felt it was appropriate to clarify the board's position and highlight the context surrounding the intervention. I leaned forward slightly. My hands didn't shake, my jaw didn't clench, but I watched every movement, especially Tom's. He still hadn't looked up. His shoulders were hunched and his foot tapped once, then twice, like he was trying to keep a rhythm that no one else could hear. This wasn't punishment, Isolde continued. It was a moment of necessary enforcement. The resident in question had previously received verbal advisories regarding infant positioning and was observed ignoring them repeatedly. That was a lie, and I wasn't the only one who knew it. 3 seats ahead of me, Edith shifted uncomfortably. This board exists, Isolde said, to maintain safety and community well-being. Sometimes that requires decisive action. She let the silence hang, letting the words sink into the room like wet cement. No one clapped, no one questioned. She turned toward Tom. Would the treasurer like to address the compliance forecast for Q2? Tom startled slightly, then reached for his folder. His fingers hovered over the clasp, then paused. His mouth opened. I don't think we should gloss over it. The room shifted subtly. People sat straighter. Isolde's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I mean, Tom said, voice tight, we shouldn't pretend nothing happened. That incident, it wasn't planned. It wasn't on the agenda. She forced a tight smile. We've addressed that. The footage speaks for itself. Tom's gaze flicked across the room. For the first time, he looked at me. His eyes met mine and held. Then they dropped again. The footage is edited, he said, more softly this time. And we never voted on that committee authority, the so-called caretaking oversight standards. It was a draft. I saw her foot shift under the table. Her smile remained. Mr. Vennick, she said, voice sweet, you signed off on the committee inclusion in the February meeting packet. His jaw twitched. I signed a packet. I didn't read every insert. Murmurs rippled down the aisle. She pivoted quickly. In that case, we'll table further discussion until the compliance summary has been reviewed. Let's stay on task. The moment passed. Tom didn't speak again. He closed his folder but didn't touch it. After the meeting adjourned, I didn't go home immediately. I waited in the parking lot. The air had cooled and the pine trees hissed softly in the wind. One by one, residents filtered out. Some nodded at me. Others didn't meet my eyes. Tom was the last to leave. He paused beside his rust-colored sedan, hand on the door. You know she lied up there, I said, not moving from where I stood near the curb. His shoulders tensed. He didn't turn. You don't have to protect her, I added. You just have to stop protecting the lie. He looked back at me, just for a second. There was something in his face that hadn't been there earlier. Not guilt, not shame, conflict. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice cracked on the last word. Then he got in the car and drove off. The next morning, we woke to yellow flags. One on the edge of our lawn, another staked beside the porch steps, and a third wedged into the flower bed under the birch chair. They fluttered in the breeze like warning signs at a construction site. Each one was marked with a small black number and a corresponding code in bold red letters. PRV 2.3, unauthorized porch furniture. CBH 6.1, non-compliant breastfeeding location. EVN 4.7, emotional noise violation. Emotional noise violation. I bent down, peeled the laminated tag off the third flag, and read it twice. My breath left me in one slow exhale. I didn't wake Morel. She hadn't slept well. I could hear her moving upstairs, the soft rhythm of rocking and the hum of the white noise machine. Avon's cries had been faint overnight, but they came in intervals, short, sudden bursts followed by silence that stretched too long. The fourth flag arrived just after noon, this time hand-delivered by a man in a tan HOA windbreaker who didn't bother to knock. He stood at the edge of our property, jabbed the flag into the soil like a claim stake, then walked off. I watched him through the window. He never looked back. The notice this time cited recurring disruption to community standards and informed us that an initial fine of $250 would be imposed if the birch chair was not removed within 48 hours. I walked out and sat in it, not for defiance, not for principle, just to remember what it had felt like before Isolde, before the flyers, before Morel stopped coming out here entirely. The wood creaked beneath my weight. The grain was worn smooth from years of use. My mother's use, then mine. When we moved in, I had sanded and sealed it by hand, not because I had to, because I owed that chair the same care it had given my family. From the porch, I could see 3 other homes that now had the parental diligence matters flyer posted in their windows, all facing the walking trail, all angled toward us like judgmental eyes. The flyer had taken root. Isolde didn't need to convince the entire neighborhood, just enough of it to make the rest afraid to choose a side. That afternoon, the violation envelope came, thick again, same gold seal. This time, the HOA claimed that Morel had verbally resisted corrective action and was now under review for possible escalation to child welfare consultation. They were threatening to call Child Protective Services. Morel didn't cry when I showed her. She didn't even look angry. She just looked still, like everything inside had gone quiet. She took the envelope, placed it on the kitchen counter, and walked upstairs without a word. That silence sat heavier than anything they could write. I called Edith. She didn't answer at first, but an hour later, she knocked softly at the back door and let herself in like she had the week after we moved in. She stood in the threshold, holding a plate of lemon bars she clearly hadn't meant to deliver until I'd called. "I was there," she said before I asked. "I saw it. I saw her strike Morel." "Will you say that in writing?" Edith's mouth tightened. "If I do, they'll come after me too." "They already are," I said, and handed her the 4th flag. She held it between 2 fingers like it might burn. "She's escalating," I nodded. "She's cornered." Edith didn't stay long, but she left with a copy of the footage. I didn't ask her to do anything. I just let the truth sit in her hands and trusted it would find its way forward. That evening, I went for a walk around the loop. As I passed the clubhouse, I noticed the community chalkboard had a new entry written in bright green ink. Upcoming workshop, Infant Ergonomics and Responsible Maternal Practice, led by Maran. I stood there for a long time, staring at those words. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was building a platform, a doctrine, a cult of quiet correctness that dressed its humiliation in the language of responsibility. And if no one stood in her way, this wasn't going to end with a chair or a slap. It was going to end with someone losing their child. I replayed the footage at midnight. Not the slap this time. I'd seen that enough to memorize every twitch in Isolde's wrist. I was reviewing the seconds before it. The angle was wide, capturing more of the sidewalk than I remembered. There was something in her hand when she approached. A red folder, nearly buried under the edge of her tote bag. I hadn't noticed it during the confrontation. I zoomed in, froze the frame, enhanced the still. The label was handwritten, jagged in black marker, Caretaking Oversight Draft, Q1. My cursor hovered over it, draft. The next morning, I sifted through the public HOA filing archive. Monarch Ridge wasn't tech-forward, but they'd digitized their meeting minutes last year. I combed through PDFs of every quarterly session looking for the term. No mention, no committee, no vote, no formal creation of anything resembling caretaking oversight. Not even in the fine print. I expanded the search. HOA newsletters, advisory notes, board action items. Still nothing. Then I searched the HOA's internal site. Not the public portal, but the back-end member dashboard that I'd reluctantly registered for when we moved in. Buried under the Upcoming Initiatives tab was a link labeled COPE. It had no description, just a timestamp, dated 3 weeks before the slap. I clicked it. What opened was a draft document, unofficial, unratified, and incomplete. It detailed a self-proposed committee, caretaking oversight for parental environments. The document described on-the-spot corrections, resident-led observational compliance, and, most disturbingly, intervention thresholds in cases of maternal stubbornness. Maternal stubbornness. This wasn't policy, this was ideology, branded in administrative fonts, and it had no board signatures, no ratification, just a single author field at the bottom, prepared by Isolde Maran. I stared at the page, mouth dry. The document had been quietly uploaded, but never voted into existence. It was a phantom law, used as justification to strike my wife in front of our child. And I had just found proof. Downstairs, the birch chair still sat unbothered in its place. The yellow flag beside it had fallen during last night's storm, half buried in a puddle of mud. Morel hadn't asked about the flags today. She hadn't asked about much. But when I walked back up with a printout of the draft clutched in my hand, I saw the nursery door cracked open. She was inside, rocking Avon in the dim blue light of the sound machine. Her voice was low, barely a whisper, humming something that sounded like the song her mother used to sing. "I found it," I said gently. She didn't look up, but her shoulders relaxed just slightly. "What?" "The policy she used to justify the slap. It doesn't exist. She made it up, uploaded it to the portal, labeled it a draft." Morel kept humming, her chin brushing against Avon's hair. After a moment, she whispered, "So it's just her." I nodded. "It's just her." That afternoon, I called the only person I trusted to help me confirm the legal weight of what I'd found. My father. He didn't pick up at first. I paced the living room, watching the birch chair through the window like it might disappear if I looked away. On the third ring of my second call, he answered. "Corwin, I need you to look at something," I said. "It's about a local HOA committee and a fabricated justification for physical contact." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing, calculating. "What kind of contact?" She struck Morel. He didn't ask who. He didn't ask why. "Forward me everything," he said. "Drafts, timestamps, names, and your recording. I'll decide jurisdiction and assign it away from my office. You'll stay out of it officially. Understood?" "Understood." I sent it all. Within 20 minutes, he replied with a single sentence. "This qualifies as impersonation of legal authority under Section 180.7. Build your timeline. Keep her chair in place. Don't move it." I turned off my phone, walked outside, sat in that birch chair for the first time in days. I felt the same thing I always had in that seat. Steady, grounded, older than noise. Only this time, I wasn't just sitting. I was anchoring the truth. Morel didn't come downstairs for breakfast. She hadn't said much since I showed her the draft document, but I could feel it shifting inside her, like something too heavy to carry was slowly being packed into a corner she didn't want me to see. The blinds stayed drawn. Avon's feeding schedule had tightened again. The silence in the house felt lined with pressure. I made coffee and waited. It was almost noon when I heard her voice through the baby monitor. Not words, just humming. The same lullaby over and over, soft, steady, familiar. That was when I knew this wasn't going away quietly. The HOA had moved from citation to character assassination, and now, through some warped sense of control, they were threatening child welfare involvement based on an invented committee, non-existent policy, and a slap caught on video. And I'd let it sit for days. I stepped out onto the porch. The birch chair waited, unbothered by the war it had somehow become the center of. But now the grass around it was marked with bright chalk lines, yellow and green. A cluster of small cones sat on the edge of the sidewalk, like it was a construction zone. I checked the mailbox. Inside was another folded letter in a clear HOA envelope. This one was hand-signed by Isolde. Notice of escalation, persistent public non-compliance and parental risk flag. Failure to respond may trigger third-party child safety review per advisory option filed under HOA caretaking oversight protocol. The protocol she invented, the advisory she fabricated. She was bluffing, but she was using language designed to terrify. And it worked, because when I showed it to Morel, her hands didn't tremble, her voice didn't rise. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "I don't want them near her." That's when I called my father again. This time, he answered on the first ring. "They're threatening CPS," I said. "Did they issue a summons?" "No, just a letter, signed and sealed under a fabricated committee." "Do not respond to it," he said. "Do not remove the chair, and do not attend any workshop they schedule without counsel." "What happens next?" "You keep documenting, and you wait for Tom." I frowned. "Tom?" He exhaled like he knew more than he was letting on. "Isolde's cousin, HOA treasurer. He's not as loyal as she thinks." "How do you know?" "I remember his name. He was a volunteer paramedic for years. Worked with our trauma diversion task force during the Jackson fire. He doesn't tolerate institutional abuse." I hung up and stared at the envelope again. If my father was right, Tom was the crack forming under Isolde's foundation. And if I was right, she had no idea he was about to break. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun began to dip behind the ridge. Avon was finally asleep in the upstairs crib, and Morel had curled into the edge of the couch with a pillow tucked under her arm like armor. I watched the sidewalk, watched the way the community seemed to bend around us. Neighbors who used to nod now crossed to the other side of the street. Others paused at the chalk marks and kept walking. Then, just after sunset, Tom appeared. He didn't walk up to the porch. He stood 10 feet back, near the edge of the lawn, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. He looked tired, like the HOA board had been draining him just as much as us. "I saw the notice," he said quietly. "The red one. They're bluffing." He nodded once. "Not for long." We stood in silence. Wind brushed the trees. "I know she made it up," Tom said finally. "The committee, the oversight rules. I didn't vote for it. None of us did. Will you say that in writing?" He hesitated. Then he gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. "I'll bring it tomorrow, early." I didn't thank him. I just met his eyes, held them, let him see what it meant. Because now, finally, the crack was real, and something inside Isolde's walls had started to give. He showed up at dawn, not with a knock, just a soft cough, followed by a shadow passing across the front window. I opened the door, still in the sweatshirt I'd fallen asleep in, and there was Tom Vennick, standing with a folder clutched against his chest, like it might disappear if he blinked. "I printed the whole thread," he said quietly. He stepped inside, wiping his shoes out of habit even though the porch was dry. His eyes swept the living room like he expected someone to stop him. Morel was still upstairs. Avon had only just started stirring through the monitor. Tom placed the folder on the coffee table. Inside were 4 documents. The first was a printed email chain with timestamps. All from Isolde, no board members copied. Subject lines like "drafting COPE" and "urgency of visible authority." One message read, "Don't worry about ratification. We'll enforce it first, formalize later. They'll thank us when the kid's not hurt." The second was a file attachment titled "COPE Master V3" with no record of approval in any of the public HOA minutes. The third was Tom's typed and signed statement, a witness affidavit declaring the COPE initiative was never brought to vote, and that Isolde had used its name unilaterally during her intervention. The fourth, a photo, a screenshot of a text she'd sent him after the incident. It read, "Let him escalate. No one wants to be the guy who sues over a baby slap." I read that one twice, then a third time. Tom sat down across from me, elbows on his knees. "She thinks this is a crusade," he said, "that she's saving these families from themselves. She talks about it like it's a calling. Did she know you were coming to me?" He shook his head. "She thinks I'm too scared," and I was. I looked at him, really looked at him. His hands were calloused, knuckles scarred from an old burn. He didn't blink much when he talked, and his breathing had that tightness. Someone who'd once seen real pain and still remembered what it felt like to hold the line. "You were a medic?" "Used to be, until my back gave out. Volunteer unit out in North Vale, mostly fires and rollovers, but I saw enough neglect cases to know what abuse really looks like." He nodded toward the nursery upstairs, where the baby monitor still hummed. "That wasn't abuse. That was a mother saving her kid's lungs." I didn't respond, not yet. He leaned forward and slid something else across the table, a board resolution form, blank, except for the HOA letterhead. "She's planning to force a backdated vote next week. Get the board to sign it after the fact. Retroactively legitimize everything, even the slap, especially the slap." I stared at the empty signature lines. 5 boxes. She'd only need 3. "You're still treasurer." "I won't sign it," he said, "but she'll try to replace me first." That gave me pause. Can she? If she gets enough momentum, tells them I'm unstable, non-compliant, whatever label she thinks will stick. She's good at that, spinning control like it's responsibility. I picked up the photo again, the screenshot. "Let him escalate?" That wasn't care. That was calculation. "I'm submitting everything to the county by noon," I said. "My father's recused himself, but he's already lined up an ADA, civil battery, impersonation of legal authority, and she's tampered with procedural bylaws. That's enough." Tom nodded. "Do it." We didn't shake hands. We didn't need to. He stood, pulled on his coat, and paused at the door. "She's going to come hard after this. You know that, right?" "I'm counting on it." He hesitated again, then glanced back, voice low. That chair. The one your wife was in when it happened. Keep it exactly where it is. Why? He smiled faintly. Because one day, when this is over, people will walk by and say, "That's the chair where it started." He left before Morel came. Downstairs, I tucked the photo inside the affidavit, duplicated every document, uploaded the files to my secure drive, labeled the folder Cope Collapse. Outside, the birch chair caught the morning light like it was nothing more than furniture. But now, it was evidence. I spent the morning documenting everything: the affidavit, the email chain, the unauthorized Cope draft, the flagged footage from the porch cam, Tom's statement, carefully scanned and preserved in 3 separate folders, 2 local, 1 encrypted offsite. I logged every digital timestamp, every metadata signature, every confirmation trail. If this went to court, I wanted nothing left to question. By noon, I sent the compiled evidence to the assistant district attorney my father had connected me with. Casey Mora, Civil Litigation Division, neutral jurisdiction, handpicked for integrity. Her reply came 27 minutes later. Material received, multiple counts of procedural fraud and unauthorized authority enforcement confirmed. Preliminary review meets standard for civil battery and abuse of position. Beginning complaint drafting process immediately. She attached a preliminary case tag number and an advisory. Do not engage with HOA leadership until contacted. Let the system do the lifting. I stared at that line for a while. Let the system do the lifting. That might work in a normal neighborhood. But Monarch Ridge wasn't normal, not with Isolde building a throne out of silence. I needed more than evidence. I needed weight. And in a neighborhood like this, weight meant witnesses, patterns, documentation beyond my word and Tom's. So I started building a timeline. Every flyer, every flag, every letter we'd received, scanned, organized, annotated. Each violation marked by date, time, and content. The fake committee draft was flagged in red. Isolde's quote about the baby slap was tagged and time-stamped. Next, I created a map, a visual grid of every home that had posted the Parental Diligence Matters flyer, 14 so far. Then, I cross-referenced those homes with known complaints, neighbors who had mentioned quiet conflicts over stroller colors, child noise, improper feeding accessories. Edith's story had cracked the door. Others would follow if they felt protected. I printed 2 copies of everything and placed them in a sealed folder marked Case Back A. One would stay in my fireproof safe. The other would be hand-delivered to Casey once the filing went through. Morel hadn't asked what I was doing, but she sat in the living room now, Avon sleeping across her chest, her gaze fixed on the window. She hadn't opened the blinds, but I could feel her watching the porch. "You're building something," she said softly. "I'm not just reacting anymore," I replied. "We're setting the floor under her collapse." She nodded barely. "She won't stop." "No, but we're not alone anymore." That afternoon, I made 3 discreet visits. First, to Edith's house. She opened the door before I knocked. "I've been waiting," she said, holding up the USB stick I'd given her last week. "It's all on here, my account, my statement, everything I saw." She handed it over like it weighed something. "Others are ready too," she added. "They just need someone to say it's safe." Second visit, Rasha Mayan, 2 blocks down. Single mother, toddler with severe food allergies. Isolde had once accused her of public contamination for using an EpiPen on the community lawn. She showed me the letter, signed, dated, threat of expulsion. "I never spoke up," she said, "because I thought I was the only one." "You weren't." Third visit, Dorian Luce, grandfather to twins. The HOA had cited him for improper stroller usage after wheeling both kids in a tandem jogger model not approved under the Heritage Equipment Standard. He'd kept the notice, still folded, still sharp at the corners. I brought every account back, logged them, numbered them, patterned them against Isolde's timeline. The narrative she'd built began to twist under its own weight, and still the chair remained. They hadn't taken it yet. No new flags had appeared since Tom's affidavit. But I felt it every time I walked past the porch, like a waiting game played in slow, silent stares from neighbors across the path. Just before dinner, I printed the final timeline draft. It ran 12 pages. At the top, I wrote, community pattern of enforcement abuse, Monarch Ridge Reserve HOA, chairline strike precedent, and at the bottom, prepared by Corwin Elsher, Environmental Risk Compliance Officer, North Vale and Western Regional Infrastructure Review Board. I signed it, not because anyone asked, but because it was time this community remembered that titles worked both ways. I spent the next day knocking on doors, not with anger, not with a speech, just a folder, a simple question, and a promise. No one had to speak publicly unless they wanted to. Most of the neighbors didn't answer. A few peeked through blinds and pretended they hadn't seen me, but others, they cracked open doors and leaned close, eyes scanning the sidewalk like the wind might carry our conversation to Isolde's porch. By late afternoon, I had 6 written statements, each one describing a separate HOA overreach incident involving Isolde Moran. Nothing as violent as what she did to Myrell, but enough to show a pattern: threats, fines, social shaming, always using motherhood as a tool, always under the guise of community safety. One story stuck with me more than the rest. A mother named Arielle Lynn, soft-spoken, professional. Her toddler had thrown up on a walking trail during a hot day last summer. Isolde left a citation on her windshield: biological waste left in shared space. No one helped her clean it. No one spoke up. Arielle's voice cracked when she handed me her written statement. She makes you feel like you're the broken one, she said, and by the time you realize you're not, no one remembers what actually happened. I thanked her. She didn't ask what I planned to do with it. They didn't need promises of justice. They just needed someone to believe them. Back at the house, I scanned every statement, saved each one under its own case ID, and added a new column to the timeline. 6 voices became data points. Each one pushed the story wider, louder, clearer. At sunset, Tom returned. He didn't stay long, just stood under the archway with a document tube and a guilty expression. This is everything from the last 2 years, he said. Board minutes, vote tallies, internal memos, not public-facing. She didn't think I kept backups. Did you tell her you were stepping away? Not yet. She's trying to push an emergency vote tomorrow, reinstating COPE retroactively. She can't. She's trying anyway. He looked down. I think she knows she's losing. I took the tube and nodded. We'll make sure she does. Inside, I started sorting the minutes. They confirmed everything. No record of COPE, no approval for the flyers, no authorization for on-the-spot physical enforcement. And tucked at the bottom of one set of meeting notes was a line scribbled in blue pen, barely legible. Let's move fast, ratify after, C won't fight back. C, me. She'd written me off before I'd ever stood up. That night, Myrell sat beside me while I filled out the witness index. She didn't speak until I closed the laptop. Why do you think she's doing all this? She asked. It can't just be about rules. It's not. I turned toward her. She looked tired, but she'd started leaving the nursery door open again. Avon was sleeping longer between feedings. Her hands didn't shake anymore when she passed the porch window. She's not protecting the community, I said. She's building a system where she never has to be questioned. Myrell leaned into my shoulder. Then question everything. The next morning, I called Ada Mora. She was already reviewing the final compile case and wanted statements from at least 2 board members by the end of the week. Tom was ready. The second would be trickier. Still, I had what I needed to move. Before noon, I printed 3 hard copies of the complete report and sealed them in red-labeled folders. One went to Oda Mora, one into my home fire safe. The third I held in my hands as I walked toward the community center for the upcoming board meeting. Every step I took past another porch, another window, another flyer either taken down or quietly faded behind glass. I reached the steps. The birch chair still sat behind me in perfect view. When I opened the door to the clubhouse, I didn't hesitate, because everything she'd built, every lie, every flag, every threat, was about to face the weight of truth, and I wasn't the only one carrying it anymore. The board meeting began in silence. No welcoming remarks, no pleasantries. Just the dull scrape of folding chairs as neighbors shuffled into the clubhouse and took their seats. The air was heavy. Even the overhead lights seemed dimmer, flickering once before holding steady. Isolde sat at the center of the board table, flanked by 2 members who avoided looking at her. Her nameplate had been polished. Her binder was twice as thick as usual. A printed agenda rested neatly on the table. but there was no mention of Cope on the front page. She was waiting to slip it in, like always, once no one was looking. I stood near the back with the red label folder tucked under my arm. I didn't sit. I wasn't here to be quiet. As we open tonight's session, Isolde began, I'd like to reaffirm that the board's recent actions, though misunderstood, were conducted in the interest of community harmony. A number of residents have expressed concern over recent interventions, particularly with respect to child safety enforcement. Let me be clear, no rules were broken. Her voice was steady, measured, each word placed carefully, like furniture in a showroom. But, she continued, given the volume of confusion, I propose a retroactive board approval of the Caretaking Oversight Policy for Enforcement, SOAP. We have a draft ready to circulate. It will help clarify and standardize enforcement language moving forward. She pulled out a fresh document, stapled, unofficial, no signatures. Tom didn't reach for it, neither did anyone else. This initiative, Isolde said, simply aligns our values with consistent practice. We're not punishing, we're guiding. And it's time we move beyond these baseless accusations. I stepped forward. Accusations? I said, my voice carrying across the room. You mean the video of you slapping my wife? Or the fake committee you invented to cover it up? Her eyes froze. I'm sorry, she said with that same clipped smile. The gallery isn't permitted to speak until board comment is opened. Then I move to suspend the session, Tom said suddenly, rising from his seat, pending review of a formal complaint submitted to the county prosecutor's office regarding fabricated policy, physical misconduct, and abuse of authority. You could hear the shift in the room, the low murmur, the nervous turning of heads. Isolde stiffened. There's been no such complaint. The board has not been notified? The board has, I interrupted, holding up the folder, and the county has too. This folder contains sworn statements from 6 residents describing abuse of authority, copies of the falsified Cope draft, and metadata proving you uploaded it to the HOA portal without a vote. I stepped forward. Here's your signature. I placed the screenshot from her private email chain on the table. Here's your threat, and here's the footage of you, striking my wife while invoking a policy that doesn't exist. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The truth, in its rawest form, was louder than anger. I'd advise the board not to touch that document, I added. It's under evidence lock now. Anyone who signs it risks criminal liability. Isolde reached for it anyway. Tom blocked her hand. I'm done, he said, voice clear. I resign, effective immediately. He stood and stepped away from the table, joining the audience without a word. A few gasps followed him. Isolde stared straight ahead, lips parted, her hands motionless. Then, for the first time since we moved in, Edith stood up from the crowd, quietly, firmly. I saw her hit Morel, she said. I saw the baby scream, and I saw her smile after. The words cut cleaner than any footage. Another resident stood, then another. Ariel stepped forward with her stroller. Dorian nodded from the back row. One by one, the silence cracked. Isolde gripped the edge of the table. This is a coordinated attack, she snapped. Emotional manipulation by one family with a personal grudge. And yours, I said, was a single action that revealed your whole structure. Tom's voice returned, this time quieter. You turned safety into punishment. Someone called for a formal vote of no confidence. No one objected. The board folded, and the woman who had struck a nursing mother in the name of community standards had nothing left to say. They didn't let her finish the meeting. After the vote of no confidence passed, unanimous, final, Isolde tried to call a procedural delay. She reached for the agenda packet like it could anchor her authority, like printed paper would hold up the crumbling platform beneath her. But no one listened. Tom had already disconnected his mic. The secretary had walked out. The rest of the board just sat frozen, hands folded, eyes cast downward like children waiting for the bell to ring. Ada Mora entered the clubhouse at 6:47 p.m. She didn't make a scene. She didn't raise her voice. She walked to the front of the room, introduced herself to the remaining board members, and placed a legal folder down in front of Isolde. Ms. Marin, she said calmly, you are being served notice of an official inquiry into multiple violations, including unauthorized enforcement under false authority, impersonation of a regulatory agent, and civil battery. The silence that followed didn't feel stunned. It felt relieved. Someone in the third row exhaled sharply. A chair creaked. Dorian Luce nodded once, slow and deliberate. Morel didn't speak. She sat near the back beside Edith. Avon bundled against her chest, head resting just below her collarbone. Her eyes stayed locked on Isolde. "I demand a closed hearing," Isolde said, voice brittle. "This is a private community matter." Mora didn't even blink. "No, ma'am, you made it public when you laid hands on a resident and posted flyers targeting families by name." Isolde's mouth opened like she had more to say, but her voice caught. The words wouldn't come, not this time. Outside, a plain white county vehicle pulled up to the curb. 2 officers waited beside it, casual, calm, non-aggressive. They weren't here for a show. They were here to document the moment. Tom stepped forward and placed his copy of the COPE draft on the table. "She authored this. No vote, no approval. She presented it as policy during an act of force." Mora took it with a nod. "It's already been verified in the complaint record." "You all followed her blindly," Isolde muttered, her voice cracking. "You think this ends with me?" "No," I said from the back. "It ends with the fear you built, the silence you enforced, the way you used families to prop up your image of control." She finally looked at me. "You think you're a hero?" "No, I'm a father." I stepped forward, slowly, and placed the final sealed folder beside Mora's briefcase. This contains a full timeline of resident testimonies, physical citations, and metadata proving she falsified community documents to create the illusion of legal standing. The porch cam footage is time-stamped and verified by independent forensic review. Isolde's hand hovered like she still had power left in her fingers. Then she pulled it back into her lap. The officers didn't cuff her. There was no arrest, only the delivery of legal notice. But the weight of that envelope, the witness statements, the ADA's presence, was heavier than any metal they could have wrapped around her wrists. Mora gave her a quiet nod. "You are not required to respond now, but I advise you not to destroy or alter any records from your term. We will be following up." Isolde stood slowly. She didn't slam anything. She didn't make a speech. She simply gathered her binder, tighter than necessary, and walked out of the clubhouse without looking back. No one followed, no one clapped, no one thanked her. And that silence was the cleanest verdict any of us could have asked for. Mora turned to the remaining board. Per county policy, a temporary hold has been placed on all HOA enforcement powers pending review. A special election will be scheduled within 30 days. Until then, no fines may be issued, no citations processed, and no community-wide directives distributed. She turned to me next. "We'll be in contact," I nodded. "You'll have full cooperation." She looked at Morel then, eyes softening just slightly. "Your statement was enough, but your silence tonight spoke louder." Morel gave a faint nod, one hand resting on Avon's back. For the first time in weeks, her posture wasn't guarded. She sat upright, still, steady. The meeting ended without formality. People stood, some slowly, others with whispered conversation. But no one rushed. They stayed for a while, talking, connecting, remembering what it felt like to be neighbors without fear. And outside, the porch lights turned on one by one across the loop, not flickering, just steady. It rained the next morning, not a storm, just a steady drizzle that softened the edges of everything. The porch wood darkened beneath my shoes as I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and stood beside the birch rocking chair. No flags, no notices, no yellow chalk marks claiming the grass. Just the sound of drops on leaves and the faint coo of Avon through the open upstairs window. The chair looked older somehow, weathered but still standing, still part of this house. Morel joined me a few minutes later, barefoot, Avon bundled in her arms, tucked close beneath the edge of her shawl. Her steps were quiet, measured, like every part of her was still waiting to see if the peace would hold. She sat in the chair without hesitation, no glance over her shoulder, no twitch at passing footsteps. Just one deep breath as the wood adjusted beneath her, and then the gentle motion of the chair moving again, slow and smooth, like it remembered the rhythm. Avon sighed and nestled against her chest. "I forgot how quiet it could be," Morel said, eyes on the trees. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Later that afternoon, a neighborhood work crew arrived to repaint the sidewalk. They covered the last traces of the chalk outlines, the ones that had surrounded our porch for weeks. No cones, no flags, just paint and water. The HOA logo was stripped from the community board. The flyers came down 2 days later. Tom sent a short text. Special election scheduled. I'm not running. He didn't need to. His part was already written into the story. Quiet defiance, the kind that mattered most. Edith stopped by with lemon bars again. This time she stayed long enough to sit in the kitchen and talk with Morel. Not about the board, not about the flyers, just about books, grandkids, garden plans, normal things. Things we'd almost forgotten belonged to us. By the end of the week, Ada Mora confirmed that the county was moving forward with the formal complaint. Civil charges would be filed. Isolda's ability to serve on any community board, here or elsewhere, would be suspended pending outcome. Her name was officially redacted from all outgoing HOA communications. That wasn't just a punishment, that was a reset. The community began to breathe again. Some neighbors apologized, others didn't say anything, but they started waving again. The ones who posted flyers removed them, not in shame, in quiet recognition. And every morning, Morel returned to the porch. The chair became a fixture again, not of rebellion, but of belonging. The same chair my grandfather had built for my mother, that had held my wife in her most fragile moment, now carried my daughter in her peace. Somehow, that was enough. Somehow, that made everything make sense again. One evening, a new family moved into the house 2 doors down. A young couple, first-time parents. They walked the loop slowly with their stroller, stopping briefly as they passed our yard. I read about what happened, the husband said softly, nodding toward the chair. Was that really the one? It still is, I said. He smiled. It's good to know people stood up. I watched them walk away, the stroller wheels gently thudding against the sidewalk. No citations, no flags, no one watching from windows. Just a family, trying to live. And that night, when Morel leaned into me and said, "You kept us safe," I didn't correct her. I didn't say we kept each other safe. I just wrapped my arm around her waist and held her, while Avon slept in the crook of her arm. Because no HOA rulebook, no committee draft, no neighbor's glare had the right to dictate how peace looked on our porch. That had always belonged to us, and now it always would. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Karen unclasped my niece's bra strap. For community standards, FBI agent mom ended her freedom. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?